Hi everyone, my name is Nate. I use they them pronouns and I'm a PhD candidate at the Centre for Scandinavian Studies at the University of Aberdeen. My project involves looking at and for queer bodies within Old Norse text sources, and this presentation is just a small excerpt of my current research. And for that reason, I'm going to be framing some of this as questions that still need to be answered. I'm still at an early stage in my research, and I'm keen to hear other people's thoughts on the topic. So for this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the possibility that Seidr practitioners portrayed or embodied fluid gender expressions. And just for content warnings for information, I will be talking about sex acts, as well as discussing aspects of homophobia and transphobia. So Seidr, to give a very brief definition, is a ritual practice involving various tools, such as a staff or chanting of songs, whose practitioners can affect their environment, communicate with spirits, and reveal knowledge about the world around them. The practice of Seidr has been widely defined as sexual in nature. Neil Price and Jenny Jotchins have written quite extensively on what they describe as the clear sexual acts involved in this practice. Jotchins and Price have linked descriptions of ritual from Volsapatir, which is an excerpt on the slide here, with the use of the Nithstong, a pole used to curse people in Eagle Saga and Gisla Saga, and then determined that this is the link to the apparently penetrative nature of Seidr practice. So their theory is that practitioners take on the receptive female role in order to achieve ecstatic acts. Jotchin speculates that the familiar staff of the Seidr worker was used to imitate penetration to achieve orgasm. Price builds on this speculation, highlighting sections of Volsapatir which describe the ritual use of a phallus in the presence of the Christian king Olafur. The king is investigating these continued pagan observances in this patir. This assessment of the sexual act as being penetrative and receptive is decidedly heteronormative, with the implication that there is a need for phallic penetration to achieve orgasm and thus the outcome of the ritual. But is what we see in Volsapatir Seidr? And I have to shout out to my supervisor, Dr. Burrows, for asking me to think about this. The account in Volsapatir differs very significantly from that found in the saga of Seidr, where Thorborg Littlevolva is invited to take part in a feast and called upon to tell guests their futures. This account is one of the most descriptive of Seidr practice, and it lacks the sexual overtones identified in Volsapatir, as well as the previously mentioned sagas. Both of these ritual accounts, though, are positioned at a distance. The women of Volsapatir are portrayed as highly sexual, which is often frowned upon in medieval circles, and their ritual in the patir is disrupted by the king when he throws their phallus to a dog. Thorborg Littlevolva is separated from the other women of the saga, categorized primarily as a practitioner of Seidr and distinct from other women. This distinction is accentuated when Thorborg asks for help with the ritual, and one of the other women present declare themselves to be neither skilled in magic nor a wise woman. So we're already establishing that Thorborg is not like the normative women of the saga. So this makes me wonder what exactly is this separation? Is this a distancing from pagan practices through a Christian lens? And this is laboured in Volsapatir and referenced somewhat in the saga of Seidr. But is it that simple? The ways in which these individuals are highlighted as deviating from normative expectations is clear. Overtly sexual, practicing Seidr, they're in a separate category, they're not like the other normative individuals. And so, knowing what we know about Seidr, their actions are then said to incur ergi, which sets them further apart. Now, Folkestrom has published a lot of research on possible meanings of ergi, settling on the feminine sexual role as the most common use of the term. Strom has also noted that ergi relates to a sexual metamorphosis, where the accused takes on a female role, but then states that such a metamorphosis is patently impossible. And I would disagree. Britt Soley and Armin Jacobsen attribute unmanliness and a contemporary meaning of homosexuality to ergi, agreeing with Strom that the sexual aspects cannot be divorced from what is labelled the ergi complex. So this work, it supports Price and Jotchen's theory of Seidr containing sexual elements, but it also discounts the possibility of fluidity in gender performance, which I suspect that an ergi act of magic or ritual or similar can also embody. So I suspect that ergi covered sexual behaviours. Sorry, I agree that ergi covered sexual behaviours, but saying that Seidr invoked accusations of ergi does not, in my opinion, mean the practice itself only was performed through sexual behaviour. In Lokasenna, so there's a quote on the slide here, we can see that Seidr was erger, a word related to ergi and sharing the same meanings, because it was a deviant behaviour. So we see that ergi covered a more general meaning of deviant behaviour that included sexual behaviours. Seidr and ergi are linked. The practice of Seidr meant that an individual deviated from expected norms and existed outside normative structures of behaviour and gender. To be ergi also meant to be transformed into something else, whether in perception, so being accused of ergi, therefore feminine, or practicing Seidr, or in body. And I'm minded to think of Loki's transformation into a horse, giving birth to eight-legged Sleipnir, which is mentioned elsewhere in Lokasenna. I wonder then if the ergi of Seidr is that the individual exists outside these structures, separated by pagan ritual, sexual appetite, and from others supposedly of their gender. The performance of the practice is their transformation, and also their ergi. Gendering of Seidr is quite evident in the previously discussed scholarship. In Ynglinga Saga, we see the assertion that Seidr garnered ergi for men and was taught only to women by the Aesir. Terry Gunnell has suggested that the performance of Seidr through chant or song created a performance space meant only for women, and this is seen in the Saga of Aric the Red, with Thjobog's performance of the ritual. Strom, Jotchens, and Price all lead arguments towards the practitioner through ergi, taking the female or receptive role in sexual activity that they've linked with Seidr, concluding that the gender of the practitioner is a woman. And there are two elements in relation to gender and Seidr to draw out here. The first being that Seidr was, in fact, the province of women. In my opinion, this isn't borne out in the sources where there's evidence that both men and women practice Seidr. And to me, anyway, this is possibly a simplification of Seidr's transformative properties. There's potential for those who practice Seidr to be seen as women, proving some of this earlier argument true at one level, but this limits this fluid nature of Seidr that I'm trying to suggest. At the same time, the practitioner identified as a woman, or Seith Kona, a female Seidr practitioner, as they're pointed out as being separate, as being othered. They don't comply or fulfill the normative category of woman in the context of the sources. And the second element is that the performance of Seidr meant the practitioners became or were seen to be women, whether this is through clothing, behaviour, or expression. In other words, they were transformed through performing Seidr. And I wonder if this is true. Do all practitioners in the sources move in this very binary fashion from one point to another, or is there a greater fluidity in being labelled as a Seidr practitioner who's not compliant with normative assumptions and categories? On the surface, the positions of the previously mentioned scholars would appear to suggest that Seidr belongs solely to women and is of a sexual nature. However, if we look at this through a queer perspective, we may be able to take some of these arguments to a more nuanced conclusion. There are three terms used to describe Seidr practitioners in the sources: Seith Kona, Seith Mada, and Seith Barendir. The first two refer to woman and man, Seith workers, respectively, describing typical binary notions of gender, whilst the meaning of the third term has been debated. Folkestrom suggests that Seith Barendir is used as a derogatory term to describe Seith workers, intended to position them as the weak feminine, and is related to the word berendi, which is found in Norwegian law texts to mean a female animal, and more specifically their genitalia. Belendir is a masculine noun in Old Norse, while Belendi is a neutral noun, and it's been suggested that these could in fact be two different words altogether. Again, shout out to Dr. Burrows for prompting me with that. Berendi derives from the verb bear, meaning to bear, to carry, to give birth. So is it possible that this means to carry or bear the gift or skill of Seidr? And as the term used in the Song of Hyndla, which I've quoted a section here on the slide, does this describe all Seidr workers? Is Seidr a term that encompasses all forms of Seidr workers in all of their expressions? Now, Frog suggests that this genealogy that's documented in the Song of Hyndla gives those mentioned a common ancestry that is distinct from human, which challenges normative assumptions of social identity. So in doing this, the Song of Hyndla presents the Volar, the Vitka, and Seidr as other, as this distinct, separate category. Looking at the use of the term Seidr from a queer perspective, I would consider Judith Butler's work on the nature of injurious speech, which Butler has indicated has the potential to open up possibilities. And I quote, "In being called an injurious name, one is derogated and demeaned, but the name holds out another possibility as well. By being called a name, one is also, paradoxically, given a certain possibility for social existence, initiated into a temporal life of language that exceeds the prior purposes that animate that call." End quote. So in being named Seidr, the individuals and practitioners of Seidr exist outside the norms applied to others in the sources. There's also a potential instance of reclamation, which we know fictional historical characters cannot perform, moving away from these patriarchal associations of weakness, and femininity, but considering these terms to embody deviance and queerness in the ways in which they defy or break away from apparent norms. So I would argue that the three terms are interchangeable. They describe a category outside the binary of men and women, and I would say that's also true for Seidr Kona and Seidr Mada, since they're still outside those normative categories by virtue of being Seidr workers. That's not to say that the Seidr category exists as a fixed third point outside that of men and women, but rather it's a term to encompass the fluid and unfixed nature of the Seidr worker in this context. The Seidr worker does not fulfill or comply with normative categories of man or woman in the context of Old Norse sources. They exhibit deviant behaviours, which may include sexual but not exclusively, and are often, although not always, presented in a derogatory light in the texts. I'm constructing the gender identities of Seidr workers as fluid rather than as men or women in a binary sense. Though we know from the historiography of early modern Iceland that the majority of people accused of practicing magic were assumed to be men, differing to the trials of Western Europe in the same period, which recorded the prosecuted and executed individuals as women. So Old Norse sources demonstrate at a surface level that Seidr practitioners were not just women, and I'm inclined to believe that Seidr was a practice of transformation, the practitioners presenting fluid gender expression and performance that set them apart from others in the texts. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. Here are my Twitter handle and my email if you would like to get in touch and discuss this topic more. Thank you very much.